Hello and welcome to Dig School, cross-curricular learning themed around archaeology. This session is down to earth where we'll be picking up pieces from the past. We'll be asking what stuff found lying about in fields can tell us about change over time. And what can this tell us about specific historic events like the end of Roman Britain? And how can you find out about the archaeological evidence for somewhere you're interested in? Field walking is a term used for simply walking across fields, picking up stuff that you can see on the surface. Simply needs a field where the soil is visible so that you can see what's lying on the ground surface. It doesn't sound too difficult, does it? Have a look at this picture for a couple of minutes and see if you can spot any things on that you'd pick up. So that probably enabled you to see a few bits and pieces. You can see there's some soil and you can see there's some bits of curved pottery. There's something that looks a bit like a shell. There's a little sort of bit of clay tobacco pipe. Things looks like a cigarette right at the top. This is a sort of set up photograph. It can be a bit more difficult in real life when things are a bit more weathered, where everything's settled down, everything looks a bit more uniform. Sometimes things are covered in mud or soil. Have a look at these two images and see if you can pick out any artifacts that you might pick out in them. Well, you probably did spot a few bits and pieces, but it can be difficult, and it's exactly like that when you're actually field walking on the ground. So you can see here I've put circles around the artifacts that are there. But again, it can be easy to confuse stuff. The important thing, though, is to walk carefully in the area you're supposed to be covering, so that if you've got a group of people together that you haven't got everyone looking at the same area, it's getting missed in between. And then all of the finds are put into plastic bags and then taken away to be identified by experts. There's one example here. This is a site called Cove Hive in Suffolk. There's a sort of semi-ruined church that you can see in the background of the photograph, the ground level photograph there. And you can see people doing field walking in the field nearby, where there's a little bit of the crop growing through. You can see a sort of sheen of green, but you can see a lot of the ground. The church you can see there. The field we were walking is circled in red there. And in fact, the photograph is taken from sort of where the black X is, sort of looking back towards the church, to give you a bit of a feel for the landscape. And as you can see, perhaps looking off to the right, it's very close to the sea. We had a look at the old maps. They didn't show the settlement as looking very different. It didn't look like anything much had changed at all, apart from the fact the coastlines moved a lot. So you can see the line of the coastline on the map there, right off to the right-hand side. That blue line marks the line of the coastline today. That's coastal erosion in the last 140 years. So we looked at some slightly earlier Google Earth image, and that showed some interesting features showing up in that field. You can probably see some lines going across it, some dark lines that look like there might be field boundaries running across it, or there's two parallel dark lines running across it we thought might be a road or a trackway. So these are results we got from the field walking there. And as you can see, you've got these 8 maps laid out, and they're period by period. So have a look at those and see how you think the number and distribution of finds changed between each period. And after you've done that, have a think about at which period did the greatest decrease in the number of finds take place. Okay, so you've had a chance to look at have a think about the different periods and how the number and distribution of finds changed over time, bearing in mind, of course, that the church is right in that bottom right-hand side. So in the prehistoric period, we've just got a sort of general scatter of flint flakes there. No particular concentration, perhaps a cluster one side and another cluster the other. They're quite far apart. It certainly suggests, though, there were people using that area in the prehistoric period. Into the Roman period, again, we've got a sort of a rather general distribution, though there do seem to be more finds in the middle of the field walked area than there are in other areas. Into the early Middle Anglo-Saxon period, we can see there's a sharp drop in the number of finds. In fact, there's only 2 squares produced any evidence at all, just a single sherd each. They're right down towards the road that's there today. And not too far from the church, perhaps. Into the late Anglo-Saxon period, we see a real change. There's more pottery being found, and it's much more in the middle of the site, again, further from the road, and also about the same sort of distance from the church. Into the high medieval period, we've got a lot more pottery. Looks like there's a lot more going on here. If there's more pottery, it probably means there's more people. And there's a concentration along the edge of the road, sort of closer to the church. For the first time, we're getting a lot of pottery near the church there. And there seems to be another cluster a bit further to the north. So that made us wonder if that road that showed up on the air photograph that you can see in the bottom right-hand side, the double line that we thought might be a road, maybe that's a medieval road that's going between those 2 bits of the settlement. Perhaps there's properties, houses laid out either side of the road at that time. It's just showing you where that road is there. Into the late medieval period, there's still quite a lot of pottery. The settlement doesn't seem to shrink hugely, but actually there is a little bit of a blank space, suggesting that perhaps a couple of houses have been abandoned in the area that I've circled in red there. And to the post-medieval, that area of abandonment seems to be getting bigger. There's really very little pottery turning up from the area north of that road, above that road that I've circled in red there. And nearly all of the pottery is starting to concentrate in the southern end of the settlement, near the church and near the current cottages, which are along the road. There still seems to be quite a lot of settlement there. And then into the Victorian period, the 19th century, the settlement seems to have got smaller and separated out into just 2 little clusters, one near the church and then one where the existing cottages are. So you can see from that how the evidence from stuff that's just been picked off the surface of the field has told us about change over thousands of years. And we can also see from that which period it was that saw the greatest decrease in the number of finds, because really it's when we compare the Roman period with the period afterwards that we can see there's a really sharp drop. From then on, the settlement is either growing or it's decreasing more gently in size. Now, that's just one field, but it gives you an idea of the way that that detailed information can tell you about change over time, and for periods when we have really no historical documents telling us this sort of thing at all. Now we're going to go to somewhere else where there's been field walking done over a much bigger area. This is Raunds in Northamptonshire. And here's a map of Raunds. The village lies in the middle of the field walked area, marked with a black star there. And the sort of brown shaded areas show the extent of settlement today, the extent of the villages that are in existence today. So you've got Raunds in the middle. Off on the left-hand side, there's a sort of major river valley there, and you can see lots of other smaller streams are draining into that. And then over on the right-hand side of the map, the streams are draining off in a different direction. So you can see the map today. Now, there has been a lot of field walking done over all of this area, a lot of this area. Some places you can't, of course, do field walking where there's settlement today because there are no fields. And sometimes people won't let you on their land. And sometimes land is in permanent pasture, it's under grass, or it's in woodland, so you can't get at it. But for the area around Raunds, a lot of the area has been field walked. And what you've got in your booklet is a list of all of the sites that have produced pottery of Roman date and for the period immediately after the Roman period as well. And you've got the grid references that tell you where those were. Now, grid references work by you read along the bottom of the map first, and then you read up the side of it. The numbers of the squares are listed along the bottom of the map there. And for each of them, the grid reference relates to those numbers. So for the first one, where the grid reference is 957715, the first three numbers refer to the reading along bit. So you can see where square 95 is, just at the bottom left-hand corner there. And the 7 tells you how far along that 95 square you are. So at 7, you're just over halfway. And then the other bit is the 715. Well, you can see where 71 is. 5 tells you it's halfway, 5 out of 10, halfway. So the site there is 95 3/4 along, 71 1/2 up, which puts it there. So, and that says that's a large settlement, and so I'm going to put a big red circle there. So it's going to be bigger, and then I'm going to do it red. So work through all of those grid references. Some of them are for pottery finds of Roman date, some of them for Anglo-Saxon date, and you can mark those on the two maps in your booklet. Take a bit of time to do that, so I'll leave you to have fun doing that. So hopefully you've managed to work through all those grid references. Once you get the hang of it, it gets quite easy and quite quick to do. The first couple are quite complicated, and then you get your head around it. So you've got a load of Roman sites, a load of Anglo-Saxon sites. Some of them are large, some of them are medium-sized, and some of them are small. So what pattern did you come up with? So this is the data plotted, and hopefully your map looks something like this. And you can see what's going on in the Roman period from the pottery is that the biggest sites seem to be in that river valley on the left-hand side of the map on the west. There are a scatter of medium-sized maps sort of in the middle of the map, sort of away from the rivers and the streams mostly. And because the rivers and streams tend to be in the valleys, these are on the slightly higher bits of land. And then there's a whole scatter of very small settlements that I've shown as purple here, which just seem to be scattered across the landscape. There's a lot of settlements there. Now, each of the squares that's marked on that map is 1 kilometre long and 1 kilometre tall. So you can see that the whole map there covers about 7 kilometres square. And you can see you've got a Roman site almost every kilometre, and in some cases they're closer than that. So we can see how densely populated the area was in the Roman period. So wherever you are in much of England, you're likely to be fairly close to a Roman settlement. So that's the map for the Anglo-Saxon period using that same data with the grid references. And you can see it's very different. There are no large settlements at all. Nearly all of the settlements are small, bar just 3 or 4, which are sort of medium-sized, but even those are smaller than the medium-sized Roman ones. The domination, if you like, of that valley on the left-hand side seems to have gone. A couple of larger sites are in the valley, but a couple of the larger sites are also right on the other side of the map. And what also seems to have changed is that the smaller settlements, and there are quite a few of them, not as many as there were in the Roman period. There are fewer settlements in the area sort of up to above Raunds and to the right. That seems to have really very little settlement in it at all. It seems to be a sort of unoccupied area, quite different to the Roman period. And the area south of Raunds as well, also between Raunds and Hargrave, doesn't seem to be anything there either. So those sort of higher areas away from the streams seem to have been abandoned. And where we are getting those little settlements, they're much closer to the streams. They're also much closer to the existing settlements today. So at Raunds, there's 4 little clusters of Anglo-Saxon pottery. At Hargrave, there's 3. Up at Ringsted, there's a cluster around there as well. The Anglo-Saxon pottery seems to be closer to today's settlements than the Roman pottery was. So you can see from that how things change over time and how field walking, how just collecting that pottery off the surface has been able to tell us about that. So take a few minutes to write down in your workbook, when you compare the Roman period to the Anglo-Saxon period, what has changed? What's different? What has this evidence told us about the end of Roman Britain? So we'll end part 1 there. If you want to take a short break, we'll see you later, and then we'll move on with part 2. Okay, so in part 2 of Down to Earth, not everywhere's had the amount of field walking done around it that Raunds has, but some places have, and most places have had finds of some sort turn up over the years where people have been living there and have noticed stuff or stuff's been discovered. If you want to find out what there is around a place you're interested in, go to Heritage Gateway. That's an online website, and you can simply type in the name of the place you're interested in and then find out what's been there. You may find there are hundreds of records, you may find there are just 5 or 10. You have no idea until you look. You might be surprised by what has turned up in somewhere where you've never ever heard about it. One other place where a lot of finds that have been recorded from fields are recorded is at a website called finds.org.uk. This records finds that have been made from the surface by members of the public, some of them field walking, some of them using metal detectors. And it's very important that everything that people find is recorded, because then it enables us to find out what this tells us about the past. So if you go to the finds.org website, you can click on database and then go in and search the database. And the easiest way really is either search via map or by postcode. You put that information and it'll come up with all of the records, most of them with photographs of the finds showing you what they look like. So for Raunds, for example, if you put in Bronze Age and postcode, it'll come up with this spearhead here. You've got a nice detailed photograph of it. And if you go down to the bottom of the page, there's a map which gives you the grid reference. Just 4 figures for the grid reference here, so not those full 6 that you had. So there's just 4, but you should be able to find 0071 on your map of Raunds really easily now. So it only tells you to within a kilometre that spearhead came from somewhere in that kilometre square. But of course, looking at an area as big as Raunds, it gives you an idea of just how close it is to the place you might be in. So what we can do now is have a look at the whole of that area that was field walked at Raunds and see what finds.org can tell us about the number of finds of other sorts of dates there are. So as we go through these maps, in your booklet, note down the number of finds from each period and mark on the next map of Raunds in your booklet those locations which have produced finds from which periods. You probably find it easier to use different colours for different periods and make it easier to make sense of the map. And on the graph, show the number of finds from each period so you can see how those sort of rise and fall. So going through these, for the Bronze Age, there's 5 finds listed, and this is just for the general area around Raunds. When we zoom in, we can see that while we've boxed out that square to cover that field walked area, but actually quite a few of those finds are outside of that area. There's just 2 finds from within the field walked area. They're both quite close to Raunds itself. The Iron Age, there's 56 finds. And now from these, we can see there's actually a sufficient number, although again, quite a few of them are outside of the field walked area, which is outlined in black. We can see that for some of them are just single finds shown by the sort of wheel and the amphora, the strange black-shaped thing. Those little symbols mean one find, but the blue and yellow symbols mean there have been several finds from the same location. So you can see here we've got two single find spots, one down in the river valley to the left-hand side and one down on one up at the east. And then 13 finds, again, really quite close to Raunds itself. So I'll give you a minute to mark those on your map. Okay, moving on to Roman, there's 282 finds of Roman date from around Raunds. Again, looking at the map, we can see again quite a few of them are outside that black area, but a lot of them are inside it. And we can see that that pattern in the river valley again is coming out. The yellow symbols that have got 10 or more finds from them. Within our fieldwalked area, actually all of those, both of those, are in that river valley area on the left-hand side, the west side of the map. And that otherwise scattered across the map, there's clusters of 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 finds, coming from those same sorts of areas broadly as turned up in the field walking. The field walking was much more comprehensive. This just relied on where people happened to have been working, looking for finds. Okay, so if you've marked the Roman finds on your map, you can go forward into medieval. Now, on the finds.org website, Anglo-Saxon medieval finds are together in this category, but for all of that period, there's 142 finds. And we can see the distribution of them here. Again, when we look within the black field-walked area, we can see there's a cluster around Raunds, really. The largest number are coming from really quite close to Raunds, 19 of them, that yellow symbol. And there's another 5 that are coming from sort of the other side of it. And the others are, again, scattered across the landscape a little bit, but rather following the same concentrations as the field walking evidence for the Anglo-Saxon period. And mark those on your map. And now into the post-medieval period, the period from sort of 1550 to about 1800. Here we can see we've got 111 finds. When we look at the evidence, we can see actually there's really relatively little turning up. But most of what is turning up is again clustering around Raunds with a couple of sites further up in the north. Now, this is partly because finds of this date sometimes, quite often, don't get reported. It's very important to report everything you find, but often people would report finds of medieval and Roman and prehistoric date rather than the more recent stuff. Most of the finds that are on finds.org are coins, so they give us a good idea of where people have been spending their time because it's where people have just lost coins. But there's also things like brooches, which are the sort of equivalent of buttons or safety pins, the things that people use to hold their clothes together, which again are very easy to fall off and get lost. But I hope you can see from that how that database has evidence in it which will tell you something about where people have been spending time in the past. So, having written down the number of finds from each period and marked on the map where those are from, now answer the following questions in your workbook. Which period produced the most finds? Which produced the fewest finds? Which period produced the most finds closest to Raunds itself? And how does the distribution of the Roman finds on the finds.org website compare to the field walking? And now the final thing is for you to choose a place and see what you can find out about it from Heritage Gateway or from finds.org. They will both have information about a place you choose. It might be the place you live in, it might be the place you go to school in. They will have information about the archaeological evidence that's been discovered by people who just happened to be walking across a field, or maybe were out searching, or maybe 100 years ago somebody noticed something and reported it and recorded it. Or maybe there's been some building going on and excavations taken place. These are the places to go to try and find out what's known about a place that you'd like to find out a bit more about. So enjoy doing that. In the meantime, I hope that this has given you a chance to learn what stuff found in fields can reveal about change over time, and what it can tell us about historic events like the end of Roman Britain, because both those forms of data, both the field walking and the evidence from Findsorg, a lot of which is from metal detecting, they both showed a marked drop after the end of the Roman period, suggesting that population dropped, the amount of pottery in use changed, and when we looked at ruins, you could actually see that the sorts of places that people were living changed. People moved into different bits in the landscape. And I hope it's also given you a chance to find out how you can find out about archaeological evidence for a place that you're interested in. So I hope you've enjoyed that session of Dig School, Down to Earth, and I hope that I'll see you at another Dig School sometime soon. Thank you.